Captain Jamal Washington's hand trembled as he ended the call. 30 years of flying, now grounded for security concerns. Outside his office window, the airline CEO and board members arrived unexpectedly. He straightened his uniform, tucking away the recording that would change everything forever. Before we dive into this shocking story of injustice and redemption, where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If this story of courage against discrimination resonates with you, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more untold stories of triumph against the odds. Now, let's discover how a respected captain's career nearly crashed when prejudice infiltrated the cockpit. The morning sun filtered through the blinds as Captain Jamal Washington performed his daily ritual, meticulously polishing the golden wings pinned to his crisp Navy uniform. 32 years of flying experience had taught him that details mattered. In the air, overlooking even the smallest component could spell disaster. On the ground, his attention to detail had earned him the nickname, the Steady Hand, among colleagues at skybound airlines. At 54, Jamal's salt and pepper, hair and deep laugh lines told the story of a life dedicated to aviation. Standing 6'2" with broad shoulders and perfect posture, habits retained from his Air Force days, he commanded respect without saying a word. His eyes, sharp and observant, missed nothing when he entered a room, a trait that had saved lives more than once during his career. "Honey, did you pack your overnight bag for Tokyo?" called Tanya from the kitchen. His wife of 27 years worked as the chief cardiothoracic surgeon at Memorial Hospital, her schedule often as demanding as his own. Their partnership had weathered countless overnight shifts, missed holidays, and emergency calls. "All set," Jamal replied, coming downstairs to the kitchen where the aroma of fresh coffee filled the air. "Just double-checking my flight plan before heading out." Their daughter Amara sat at the breakfast counter, textbooks spread around her coffee mug. At 22, she was in her final year of aviation engineering, following her father's footsteps, but charting her own course. Her natural aptitude for mathematics and physics had earned her a prestigious scholarship at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. "Dad, can you look over my turbulence analysis paper before you leave?" Amara asked, sliding a tablet across the counter. "Professor Rodriguez says my calculations are solid, but I want your practical input." Jamal smiled, taking the tablet. This was their ritual, the academic and the practitioner sharing knowledge across generations. He scrolled through her work, nodding approvingly. "This is excellent, sweetheart. Your adjustment for the crosswind variables is something pilots would appreciate. Theory meets practice perfectly here." He pointed to a specific equation. "Actually, this reminds me of that storm system we navigated over the Pacific last year. The predictive models didn't capture the actual conditions we experienced." Amara quickly grabbed her stylus, making notes. "That's exactly the kind of real-world application I need. Can you tell me more about those discrepancies?" Tanya glanced at the clock on the wall. "As much as I love seeing you two geek out over turbulence, Jamal, you'll miss your pre-flight if you don't leave in 15 minutes. Jamal nodded, handing the tablet back to Amara. "We'll continue this when I get back from Tokyo. Maybe you can incorporate some of the flight data I'll collect." As he gathered his captain's bag and kissed Tanya goodbye, Jamal felt a surge of pride. His journey to the captain's chair hadn't been easy. As one of only 78 black commercial airline captains in the country, less than 3% of the total, he had navigated more than just aircraft through his career. The drive to Kennedy International Airport was familiar, a route he'd taken thousands of times. Jamal used these 30 minutes to mentally prepare, reviewing weather patterns along his trans-Pacific route, and recalling the specifics of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner he would command today. Flight SB-1423 to Tokyo was a prestigious route, typically assigned to senior captains with international experience. His thoughts drifted to his most recent accomplishment. Just 3 months ago, he had been appointed Chief Training Officer at Skybound, responsible for standardizing procedures and mentoring the next generation of pilots. The promotion hadn't come without resistance. He'd overheard Executive Vice President Thomas Whitfield questioning whether traditional passengers would respond well to his leadership role, but CEO Richard Montgomery had ultimately backed Jamal's promotion, citing his impeccable record, and the successful emergency landing he'd executed during a severe mechanical failure in 2019. That incident had made national news. Flight SB-788 from London to New York had experienced catastrophic hydraulic failure 3 hours into the journey. Jamal's calm decision-making and exceptional hand-flying skills had brought the aircraft down safely at Shannon Airport in Ireland, saving all 276 souls on board. The aviation community had recognized his actions with the Global Aviation Safety Award, the industry's highest honor. Pulling into the employee parking area, Jamal nodded to the security guard who recognized him immediately. "Morning, Captain Washington. Tokyo today, right?" said Carlos, the longtime parking attendant. "That's right. Should be back Wednesday evening. Weather looks good across the Pacific. My brother works at the weather service, says it's clear sailing for you." Jamal smiled at the informal forecast. "Good to hear. I'll take all the good weather news I can get." Walking through the employee entrance, Jamal's presence generated the usual respectful nods and greetings. Young pilots often approached him for advice or simply to express admiration. Today was no different. "Captain Washington," called a voice behind him. Jamal turned to see Ryan Zhang, a recently hired first officer. "I just wanted to thank you for the wind shear recovery techniques you taught in last week's simulator session. That cross-check method really clicked for me." "Glad to hear it, Zhang. Remember, in severe wind shear, trust your instruments but feel the aircraft. Sometimes your body senses changes before they register on the panels." The young pilot nodded eagerly, scribbling the advice in his notebook. This was the part of Jamal's job he cherished most, passing along not just procedures, but the instincts developed over 30,000 flight hours. At the crew briefing room, Jamal reviewed the manifest for SB-1423. Today he would be flying with First Officer Trevor Coleman, an experienced pilot with 15 years at Skybound. They had flown together occasionally, with Coleman always demonstrating solid technical skills, though sometimes lacking the interpersonal touch with cabin crew. The flight attendant team would be led by Chief Purser Sophia Reynolds, a 20-year veteran known for her efficiency. "Good morning, team," Jamal began, addressing the assembled crew of 12. "Today's flight to Tokyo looks straightforward. Weather en route is favorable, though we're monitoring a developing system near the Japanese coast that might give us some light chop on approach. Flight time is estimated at 13 hours and 20 minutes. He continued through the briefing, covering security protocols, passenger needs, and emergency procedures. Each crew member received their specific assignments, with Jamal emphasizing the importance of regular communication throughout the long-haul flight. As always, passenger comfort is paramount, but safety never takes a back seat. Any questions before we proceed to the aircraft? The briefing concluded without issues, and Jamal gathered his flight documents. As he walked toward the international terminal, he felt that familiar pre-flight anticipation, a mixture of responsibility and exhilaration that had never diminished even after thousands of takeoffs. What Jamal couldn't know as he strode confidently through the terminal was that today would test him in ways no emergency procedure had prepared him for. The skies ahead were clear, but on the ground, turbulence awaited that would shake the very foundation of his career and force him to fight, not just for his job but for his dignity and the future of aviation itself. The polished floors of Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 reflected the morning sunlight as Captain Jamal Washington made his way toward the security checkpoint. His uniform, adorned with 4 gold stripes on each sleeve, normally parted crowds like the Red Sea. Today was no different as passengers glanced admiringly at the commanding figure who would guide a massive aircraft safely across the Pacific Ocean. "Morning, Captain Washington," called Diane from the staff security lane. "Tokyo today, right? My daughter's doing a semester abroad there." "Good morning, Diane," Jamal replied warmly. "If you write down her address, I'll wave as we fly over." His gentle humor was characteristic of his interactions with ground staff, always professional but personable. Jamal placed his captain's bag on the conveyor belt, removed his shoes despite the expedited process for crew members, and walked through the metal detector. The routine was so familiar he could navigate it blindfolded. He had just retrieved his belongings when he noticed something unusual, a security guard he didn't recognize watching him intently from behind the scanning station. The guard, whose nameplate read N. Briggs, approached with a stern expression. "I need to see your credentials again," he demanded, despite Jamal having already displayed his airline ID, passport, and FAA licenses. "Of course," Jamal replied calmly, though puzzled by the request. He produced his identification once more. "Is there a problem?" Briggs scrutinized the documents with exaggerated care. "We've had reports of unauthorized individuals attempting to access secure areas. Just doing my job." His tone carried an edge that seemed unnecessary. "I understand. Security is everyone's responsibility," Jamal responded, maintaining his professionalism despite the guard's increasingly aggressive demeanor. After what seemed like an unnecessarily long verification, Briggs reluctantly handed back the credentials. "You're cleared to proceed," he stated flatly, without the customary "have a good flight" that most security staff offered pilots. Jamal continued toward the international gates, his mind reviewing pre-flight procedures rather than dwelling on the unusual interaction. In his 32 years of flying, he had occasionally encountered individuals who seemed uncomfortable with his authority, but he never allowed such moments to distract him from his responsibilities. Gate 42 bustled with activity as ground crew prepared Boeing 787 Dreamliner for its journey to Tokyo. Through the massive windows, Jamal could see the sleek white aircraft with Skybound's distinctive blue and gold livery. Flight SB-1423 would carry 294 passengers and 15 crew members across the international dateline. At the gate desk, Jamal greeted Operations Coordinator Patricia Nguyen. "Morning, Patty. How's our bird looking today?" Patricia's usual smile seemed strained. "Good morning, Captain. Aircraft is in good condition. Fueling is complete. Catering is loading now." She handed him the final weight and balance calculations without meeting his eyes. "Everything all right, Patty? You seem concerned," Jamal inquired. "It's nothing, sir, just there's been some unusual communication from headquarters this morning." She hesitated. "Something about special security protocols for this flight." Before Jamal could ask for clarification, First Officer Trevor Coleman approached. The 40-year-old pilot, with his perfectly combed blonde hair and perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, had already performed the external aircraft inspection. "Captain Washington," Coleman nodded, his greeting noticeably less warm than usual. "Aircraft. Looks good. I've already started the preliminary cockpit checks." "Thank you, Trevor. Let's go through the flight plan revisions together. There's a weather system developing near our arrival route that might require an alternate approach procedure." As they walked down the jet bridge toward the aircraft, Jamal sensed tension from Coleman, but attributed it to the challenging route ahead. At the aircraft door, they were greeted by Chief Purser Sophia Reynolds, whose usual efficient welcome seemed oddly formal. "Good morning, Captain First Officer," she said, her eyes darting between them. "Cabin preparation is underway. We're expecting a full flight today." Jamal noticed Sophia whispering to another flight attendant as he moved toward the cockpit. The crew's behavior was unusual, but with pre-flight procedures demanding his attention, he focused on the task at hand. As Jamal approached the cockpit door, an unexpected sight stopped him cold. 3 men blocked the entrance. Lawrence Phillips, Skybound's head of security, flanked by 2 uniformed guards. None of them wore the customary smiles reserved for the airline's pilots. "Captain Washington," Phillips began, his voice carrying down the narrow corridor, "I'm afraid I can't allow you to enter the cockpit at this time." The statement was so bizarre, so contrary to protocol, that Jamal initially thought it must be a joke. "Excuse me? We've received intelligence about security threats that requires additional verification of certain flight crew," Phillips continued, his voice deliberately loud enough for nearby passengers boarding the plane to hear. "I'll need you to step aside while we process this situation." Jamal felt his heart rate increase but kept his expression neutral, a skill honed through years of handling in-flight emergencies. "Lawrence, I've never heard of such a procedure. I completed all security protocols at the crew entrance. My credentials were verified multiple times. What specific threat are you referring to?" Phillips's expression hardened. "That information is classified. This is a matter of passenger safety." By now, several passengers had paused their boarding, processed to watch the unprecedented scene unfold. Some had even taken out phones, recording the confrontation. "I'm the captain assigned to this flight," Jamal stated firmly, keeping his voice measured despite the public humiliation unfolding. "I've been with Skybound for 27 years. Whatever concerns you have can be addressed without this display." Jamal reached for his wallet, producing additional identification. "Here's my dash clearance card, TSA pre-check, even my military ID from my Air Force service. I'm authorized at the highest security levels." Phillips barely glanced at the documents. "These protocols come directly from above, Captain. I'm going to have to ask you to come with us to the security office." First Officer Coleman had emerged from the cockpit, watching the scene with an unreadable expression. When Jamal looked to him for support, Coleman averted his eyes. "Trevor, have you been subjected to this additional screening?" Jamal asked, pointedly. Coleman cleared his throat. "No, Captain. They said it was a random selection." Sophia Reynolds stood nearby, discomfort evident on her face, but she remained silent. Not a single crew member stepped forward to question the bizarre treatment of their captain. "This is completely irregular," Jamal stated, addressing Phillips directly. "I demand to speak with Operations Control and the chief pilot immediately." "You're welcome to file any complaints through proper channels," Phillips replied dismissively. "In the meantime, First Officer Coleman will serve as acting captain for this flight." The words hit Jamal like a physical blow. In an instant, he was being stripped of command without explanation, in full view of passengers and crew. Decades of impeccable service erased by an unsubstantiated security concern. "This is unacceptable," Jamal said, his voice low but intense. "There is no legitimate security threat. What's happening here is—" "Sir," one of the guards interrupted, stepping closer, "we can continue this discussion away from the aircraft, or we can escalate the situation. Your choice." Jamal looked around, taking in the scene. Passengers, watching wide-eyed crew members avoiding his gaze, Coleman already adjusting the captain's epaulets on his own uniform. The humiliation burned deep, but Jamal's concern for the passengers' confidence in their airline overrode his personal indignation. "I'll comply under protest," he finally said, his dignity intact despite the circumstances. But this will not stand unchallenged. As the security team escorted him back through the cabin, Jamal maintained his composure, though he could hear the whispers starting immediately. What did the pilot do? Is he dangerous? I don't feel safe. One elderly passenger even clutched, her chest in apparent distress at the sight of a pilot being removed from the aircraft. The final indignity came at the aircraft door, where Phillips loudly announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please be assured that your safety is our primary concern. First Officer Coleman will be taking command of this flight, and an alternate first officer is already en route. We apologize for the slight delay." As Jamal was led through the terminal, he noticed the stares of airport staff and passengers alike. The captain's uniform that had always commanded respect now seemed to attract suspicion and concern. 32 years of excellence in aviation reduced to a walk of shame through the very terminal where he was usually greeted with admiration. In the security office, Phillips offered no further explanation, simply stating that Jamal would be placed on administrative leave pending resolution of security concerns. No specific allegations were provided, no evidence presented. "I want this documented," Jamal insisted. "I want names, times, and the specific security directive that authorized this action." "You'll receive appropriate notification through Human Resources," Phillips replied coldly. "For now, you're restricted from all flight operations and secure areas." As Jamal surrendered his airport access credentials, he caught sight of the departure board. Flight SB-1423 to Tokyo, now under Captain Coleman's command, was showing a 40-minute delay. In the reflection of the screen, Jamal saw something he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge: a black man whose achievements, qualifications, and dignity could be stripped away in an instant, with no explanation required. But beneath the shock and humiliation, something else stirred in Captain Jamal Washington, a determination that would soon transform this moment of injustice into a reckoning that neither Skybound Airlines nor the aviation industry would ever forget. The clock on the wall of Jamal's home office showed 7:15 p.m., exactly 12 hours since he should have been commanding Flight SB-1423 over the Pacific Ocean. Instead, he sat in stunned silence, still wearing his uniform, minus the gold-striped epaulets that identified him as a captain. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed the number for Vanessa Brooks, Skybound's HR director. What security concerns could possibly exist about him? His background had been thoroughly vetted countless times throughout his career. Every 2 years, he underwent comprehensive evaluations for his ATP certification. Just 3 months ago, he'd passed another security clearance for his promotion to Chief Training Officer. But something deeper gnawed at him. Was it just coincidence that in 32 years at Skybound, he had never heard of a captain being denied cockpit access due to sudden security concerns? Was it coincidence that he was one of only 78 black commercial airline captains in the country? After 4 rings, Vanessa's voice answered. "Human Resources, this is Brooks." "Vanessa, this is Captain Jamal Washington." He noticed the formality in his own voice, intentionally emphasizing his title. "Oh, Captain Washington. Yes, I was going to call you tomorrow about the incident today." Her tone was professionally detached. "Incident? Is that what we're calling it?" "I was publicly removed from my assigned aircraft without explanation or due process." Jamal took a deep breath, controlling his frustration. "I need to understand exactly what happened and why." There was a pause before Vanessa responded. "From what I understand, there was a misunderstanding regarding security protocols. These things happen occasionally." "These things do not happen occasionally, Vanessa. I've been flying for 32 years. No captain gets removed from their aircraft for a misunderstanding about security protocols. Well, in heightened security environments." "Stop," Jamal interrupted, reaching for his digital recorder and activating it. "I'm recording this conversation for accuracy. Would you please explain what specific security concern prompted my removal today?" The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "I don't have those details, Captain Washington. Security matters are handled by that department." "Then connect me with Lawrence Phillips." "He's unavailable at this hour." "Listen, I understand this was uncomfortable, but we can simply reschedule you for another flight later this week once this is cleared up." Jamal fought to maintain his composure. "Uncomfortable?" "I was humiliated in front of passengers and crew. My authority was undermined. My professionalism questioned. This goes far beyond uncomfortable, Vanessa. I appreciate your feelings, but these aren't feelings. These are facts. I want a full explanation in writing by tomorrow morning, including the specific security directive that authorized this action. I also want the names of everyone involved in the decision." "Captain Washington, I think you're overreacting. Is it standard procedure to remove black captains from their aircraft, or am I a special case?" The question hung in the air, the silence that followed more revealing than any answer could have been. That's an inappropriate insinuation," Vanessa finally responded, her voice tight. "Skybound has a strong diversity commitment. I'm not interested in diversity statements. I want answers about what happened today. If I don't receive a full explanation by 9 a.m. tomorrow, my next call will be to legal counsel." Jamal ended the call, his heart pounding. In 27 years, at Skybound, he had never threatened legal action. He had always believed in working within the system, improving himself through excellence and professionalism. But today's events had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. His phone rang almost immediately, Tanya calling from the hospital. "Jamal? Amara just called me in tears. She said you were removed from your flight. What's happening?" He explained the situation as calmly as possible, though recounting the humiliation made his voice tighten. "This is blatant discrimination," Tanya said, her voice sharp with anger. "You need to call Andre Coleman right now." Andre Coleman was an aviation attorney they'd met years ago at an industry function. Though Jamal had never needed his services, they had maintained a casual friendship. "I'm going to try working through channels first," Jamal replied. "Give the company a chance to correct this." "Honey, you know what this is," Tanya said softly. Don't let them sweep it under the rug. After promising to call Andre if the company didn't respond appropriately, Jamal ended the call. He needed more information before proceeding further. The next morning, Jamal arrived at Skybound's operations center dressed in a business suit rather than his uniform, a subtle statement that he was there on personal business. He had requested a meeting with Daniel Harper, the operations manager, responsible for flight assignments. Harper, a thin man with perpetually worried eyes, seemed uncomfortable from the moment Jamal entered his office. "Captain Washington, thank you for coming in. I want to assure you that yesterday's situation was highly unusual." Jamal activated his recorder again, placing it visibly on the desk. "I'd like to understand exactly what happened, Daniel. What security concern prompted my removal?" Harper shifted in his seat. "As I understand it, there was an intelligence report that required additional verification for certain flight crew members." "What specific intelligence? About me personally?" "I don't have access to the security reports," Harper replied, eyes darting to the recorder. "These protocols come from above my level. In 27 years at Skybound, I've never heard of a captain being denied cockpit access due to sudden, unspecified security concerns. Have you ever seen this happen to any other captain?" Harper's hesitation was telling. "Each security situation is unique." "That's not what I asked. Has any other captain at Skybound ever been removed from their aircraft under similar circumstances?" I would have to check the records." "Please do that. I'd also like to know how many of those captains, if any, were black." Harper's face flushed. "Captain Washington, I assure you that race played no role in—" "Then there should be records showing this has happened to captains of all backgrounds, correct? I'd like to see those records." "Those would be confidential personnel matters." Jamal leaned forward. "My personnel matter became very public yesterday, Daniel. I was escorted through a terminal full of passengers like a criminal." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, with Harper repeating variations of the same non-answers. Jamal left with no more clarity than when he arrived, but with a growing certainty that what had happened was far from routine. As he walked through the operations center, a flight attendant he recognized approached cautiously, looking around to ensure no one was watching. "Captain Washington," she said quietly, "I need to talk to you, but not here." Regina Taylor had been with Skybound for 15 years. Jamal had flown with her many times and knew her as a consummate professional. "There's a coffee shop 2 blocks south," Jamal suggested. "I can meet you there in 20 minutes. Regina nodded almost imperceptibly before walking away. At the coffee shop, Regina chose a table in the back corner, her eyes constantly scanning the entrance. "I shouldn't be talking to you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "They've told all crew members not to discuss yesterday's incident." "Who is they?" Jamal asked. "Management. There was a memo this morning." She pulled out her phone, showing him an email. "Look at this part." The message stated, "All inquiries regarding security procedures on SB 1423 should be directed to corporate communications. Crew members are reminded of confidentiality obligations under their employment contracts." "That's unusual for a simple misunderstanding, isn't it?" Jamal observed. Regina glanced around again before continuing. "Captain Washington, what happened to you wasn't random. I overheard Phillips talking to Coleman before you arrived at the aircraft. Phillips said, 'Remember the plan. Just follow my lead.'" Jamal felt a chill despite the coffee shop's warmth. "They planned this?" "There's more," Regina continued. "I work in crew scheduling part-time. Yesterday morning I saw an email from Thomas Whitfield to Lawrence Phillips with the subject line Washington situation. It was sent at 5:30 a.m. hours before your flight. Did you see what it said?" Regina shook her head. "Just the subject line in the system. But Captain, this isn't the first time. 3 months ago, Captain Joseph Reynolds, the other black captain on international routes, was suddenly reassigned from a Paris flight due to operational concerns. Same pattern, same players involved." As Regina shared more details, Jamal realized he was uncovering something far more systematic than an isolated incident. Before they parted, Regina promised to forward any relevant information she could access without compromising her position. What kind of system allows this discrimination to persist in 2025? Have we really progressed as a society when qualified professionals can be humiliated based on skin color? If you've ever witnessed workplace discrimination, type justice in the comments. Like this video if you believe accountability is long overdue in the aviation industry. And if you're watching this story unfold with shock and disbelief, hit subscribe to follow Captain Washington's fight for justice. But ask yourself, how would you respond if faced with such blatant discrimination in your workplace? Would you stay silent or stand your ground? With growing resolve, Jamal made the call he had initially resisted. Andre Coleman. Andre, it's Jamal Washington. I need your help with a situation at Skybound. After explaining the events, Jamal was surprised by Andre's response. Unfortunately, Jamal, this doesn't shock me. I've handled 3 similar cases in the past year alone, all involving minority pilots facing questionable security or competency challenges. 3 cases? At different airlines? Yes. There seems to be an industry-wide issue that nobody wants to acknowledge. The aviation community presents itself as a meritocracy, but the numbers tell a different story. Andre agreed to take on Jamal's case, outlining the evidence they would need to gather: security footage, witness statements, company policies, and any documentation of similar incidents. The key is establishing a pattern, Andre explained. One incident can be dismissed as a misunderstanding. Multiple incidents targeting minority pilots create a compelling case for discriminatory practices. With Andre's guidance, Jamal began systematically documenting everything. He requested his complete personnel file, including any recent security assessments. He filed formal complaints with the FAA, EOC, and Department of Transportation. He reached out to fellow pilots who had witnessed the incident, though many seemed reluctant to get involved. While reviewing security footage Andre had obtained through legal channels, they made a disturbing discovery. Lawrence Phillips had a history of similar incidents at his previous employer, a regional airline where 2 discrimination lawsuits had been settled confidentially. This is significant, Andre noted. Phillips was hired by Skybound despite this history. That suggests either negligence in their hiring process or, more concerning, approval of his methods. As Jamal expanded his investigation, he began facing subtle intimidation. Anonymous notes appeared in his company mailbox. Drop it if you want to fly again, and some skies aren't meant for everyone. The message was clear. Powerful forces wanted this matter buried. But for Captain Jamal Washington, turning back was no longer an option. The cockpit he'd been denied entry to had become a symbol of a larger battle, one that would determine not just his future, but the future of aviation itself. The morning headlines flashed across Jamal's tablet screen. Skybound Airlines implements enhanced security protocols. He tapped the notification, his jaw tightening as he read the official statement from CEO Richard Montgomery. At Skybound Airlines, passenger safety remains our highest priority. Recent global security assessments have necessitated enhanced screening procedures for all flight personnel. These standard protocols may occasionally result in flight assignment adjustments. We appreciate our customers' understanding as we maintain the highest security standards in the industry. The carefully crafted statement made no mention of Jamal's removal, no acknowledgement of the public humiliation he had endured. Instead, it normalized the incident as routine procedure, erasing both the discrimination and his 3 decades of exemplary service. Tanya looked over his shoulder, her expression darkening. They're trying to make it disappear. Typical corporate gaslighting. They're also lying, Jamal replied, setting down the tablet. There were no enhanced screening procedures for Coleman or any other crew member on that flight. Just me. His phone rang. Andre Coleman calling with updates. Morning, Jamal. Have you seen Montgomery's statement? Just reading it now, creating a false narrative to cover discrimination. Exactly, but we've got something. A whistleblower sent me an internal memo from Skybound's executive committee. It was circulated the day before your incident. Jamal put the call on speaker as Andre continued. The memo discusses implementing what they call passenger confidence measures on international routes. It specifically mentions ensuring passenger comfort with flight deck composition, and aligning crew demographics with passenger expectations on premium routes. That's corporate speak for keeping black pilots out of the cockpit on certain routes, Jamal said, the realization burning in his chest. Precisely. And here's where it gets interesting. The memo includes a list of flights where these measures should be prioritized: Tokyo, Paris, London, Zurich, all premium routes to predominantly white countries. Tanya, who had been listening intently, interjected, "That's textbook discrimination. They're literally mapping routes where they don't want black captains visible." "It gets worse," Andre continued. "I've been contacted by a flight attendant from your Tokyo flight. She overheard Lawrence Phillips telling Coleman that this was a test case for the new protocols. Apparently, if successful, they plan to implement similar measures on all premium international routes." "A test case," Jamal repeated, the words bitter on his tongue. "They used me as an experiment in discrimination." As the call ended, Jamal's tablet chimed with a news alert. And Phi, aviation blog, had picked up the story. Veteran captain removed from international flight, security concern, or something else. The article included blurry photos taken by passengers showing Jamal being escorted from the aircraft. Comments below the article ranged from concerned speculation to outright racist assumptions about his competence and character. "Don't read the comments," Tanya advised, but Jamal shook his head. "I need to understand what we're up against. This isn't just about me anymore." Later that morning, Jamal received an unexpected call from Skybound's Human Resources Department. "Captain Washington, this is Vanessa Brooks. I'm calling to inform you that you've been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation." "Investigation into what exactly?" Jamal asked, activating his recorder. "Standard procedure following a security protocol implementation. Your regular salary will continue during this period, of course." "And how long is this administrative leave expected to last?" A pause. "That depends on the findings of the investigation. In the meantime, we ask that you refrain from discussing internal company matters with media or on social media platforms." After ending the call, Jamal immediately contacted Andre to relay the conversation. "They're trying to silence you," Andre observed. "Administrative leave with pay is their way of keeping you quiet while they control the narrative." "What should our next move be?" "We continue gathering evidence. I've submitted requests for all security directives issued in the past 6 months, documentation of similar incidents, and Phillips' complete employment history." That afternoon, investigative journalist Zoe Chen contacted Jamal through Andre. Her publication, Aviation Insight, was researching discrimination patterns across major airlines. "Captain Washington, your case isn't isolated," Zoe explained during their confidential meeting at Andre's office. "I've been tracking similar incidents at 5 different airlines. Skybound has the highest number of reported cases, but they're all handled the same way: administrative leave, confidential settlements, and non-disclosure agreements." "How many cases are we talking about?" Jamal asked. 27 documented incidents in the past 18 months involving pilots of color being removed, reassigned, or subjected to special scrutiny. Skybound accounts for 9 of those cases. Andre leaned forward. "Any patterns in how they target these pilots?" "Absolutely," Zoe confirmed, pulling out a tablet with charts and graphs. "The incidents spike on premium international routes and in first-class cabins. The airlines never explicitly mention race, always citing vague security concerns or passenger experience considerations. They're systematically removing pilots of color from high-visibility positions," Jamal concluded, the reality of the situation fully dawning on him. "Yes, but they're careful to maintain just enough diversity for their publicity materials. It's discrimination disguised as security protocol." As Zoe shared more of her research, Jamal's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. Important." The anonymous email contained a document with Skybound letterhead, minutes from an executive committee meeting held 2 weeks prior. A section titled "Managing the Washington Situation" outlined strategies for containing potential reputation damage and maintaining stakeholder confidence. The document revealed that CEO Montgomery and board member Thomas Whitfield had discussed offering Jamal a generous separation package with appropriate confidentiality provisions if the situation escalated. "They already had a plan to buy my silence before anything even happened," Jamal said, forwarding the document to Andre. "This is extremely valuable evidence," Andre replied. "It shows premeditation and awareness that their actions were potentially damaging." The next morning, major news outlets began covering the story. Some framed it as a routine security matter, while others questioned the racial implications. Social media exploded with hashtags like "Fly with Jamal" and "Skybound discrimination." Skybound's response was swift. By afternoon, their legal department had contacted Andre with a settlement offer, $2 million in exchange for Jamal's resignation and a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. "They're panicking," Andre observed as they reviewed the offer in his office. "This is substantially higher than typical discrimination settlements in the industry." "I'm not interested," Jamal stated firmly. "This isn't about money. It's about changing a system that pushes qualified pilots out of the cockpit based on their skin color." As news of the incident spread, Jamal's family began experiencing the ripple effects of his stand against Skybound. Tanya reported receiving strange calls at the hospital where she worked, with callers questioning her husband's mental stability. Amara faced hostile comments from professors suddenly critical of her engineering work. "They're trying to isolate us," Tanya said during a family dinner that had become a strategy session. "Make us feel alone so we'll back down." Jamal nodded, grimly. "It's a common tactic, but they don't realize we've dealt with this our entire lives. We know how to stand our ground." The pressure intensified when Thomas Whitfield requested a private meeting with Jamal. Against Andre's advice, Jamal agreed to meet the board member at a neutral location, a private room at the Yale Club in Manhattan. Whitfield, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, offered a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "Captain Washington, thank you for meeting me. I wanted to discuss this unfortunate situation personally." "I appreciate that," Jamal replied neutrally, the recorder in his pocket capturing every word. "You've had an exemplary career, Jamal. Truly remarkable achievements. It would be a shame to see that legacy tarnished by this misunderstanding." "Is that what you call removing a captain from his aircraft without cause? A misunderstanding?" Whitfield sighed dramatically. "The aviation industry is complex with many competing interests. Sometimes decisions are made with the broader business in mind. What broader business interest is served by humiliating a qualified captain?" "Let's be candid, Jamal." Whitfield leaned forward, lowering his voice. "International routes, particularly to certain destinations, involve passenger sensitivities. Our research shows that some demographics are more comfortable with certain crew compositions." "You're saying passengers don't want black pilots?" Whitfield flinched at the directness. "I'm saying that perception matters in premium service. Skybound invests millions in creating a particular experience. All elements must align with passenger expectations." "Including the captain's skin color?" "You're oversimplifying a nuanced business decision." "There's nothing nuanced about discrimination, Mr. Whitfield." The board member's friendly facade slipped slightly. "Captain Washington, I'm trying to help you. The settlement offer is extremely generous. You could retire comfortably, perhaps start a flight school or consulting business. While Skybound continues discriminating against other pilots of color, you should think carefully about your future," Whitfield said, his tone hardening. "Legal battles are unpredictable, expensive, and can follow one for years. Your daughter is about to enter the industry, correct? These matters have wide-ranging implications." The veiled threat against Amara's future career was the final straw. Jamal stood, ending the meeting. "Thank you for making Skybound's position so clear, Mr. Whitfield. I'll be in touch through my attorney." As Jamal's investigation deepened, another disturbing fact emerged. Regina Taylor, using her access to flight records, discovered that Flight SB-1423, the Tokyo flight Jamal had been removed from, had experienced severe turbulence over the Pacific, resulting in 3 passenger injuries. First Officer Coleman, acting as captain, had failed to properly anticipate the weather system that Jamal had specifically mentioned during pre-flight briefing. "They're suppressing this information," Regina told Jamal during another clandestine meeting. The incident report mentions unexpected turbulence, but omits the fact that the weather system was identified in the original flight plan you prepared. So their discrimination actually compromised flight safety, Jamal noted, the irony not lost on him. Exactly. But they're burying that narrative to protect their security protocol excuse. As public interest in the case grew, Skybound increased. Their settlement offer to $5 million. The message was clear. They were willing to pay a substantial amount to make the story disappear. But for Jamal, the corporate cover-up had only strengthened his resolve. What began as a fight for his own dignity had evolved into something much larger, a challenge to systemic discrimination that had remained hidden in the aviation industry for decades. Despite the pressure, threats, and tempting offers, Captain Jamal Washington refused to be silenced. The truth would fly even if he couldn't. The rain pattered against the windows of Andre Coleman's office as 5 people gathered around the conference table, each bringing unique expertise to what had become known in their private communications as Operation Clear Skies. The irony of the name wasn't lost on Jamal. Clear skies were exactly what had been denied to countless pilots of color throughout aviation history. "Let's establish what we know and what we need," Andre began, standing at the whiteboard. At 47, the aviation attorney had handled dozens of discrimination cases, but none with the potential impact of Jamal's. First, we have evidence of premeditation, the executive committee memo discussing the Washington situation before the incident occurred. Zoe Chen, the investigative journalist whose research had uncovered similar patterns across multiple airlines, added, "And we have comparative data showing that these security protocols have only been applied to pilots of color, despite Skybound's claims that they're random." Regina Taylor, still employed at Skybound but now working secretly with Jamal's team, looked nervously at her watch. "I can only stay for 30 minutes. If anyone sees me here, I'll lose my job immediately. But I've brought something important." She slid a flash drive across the table. Internal emails between Phillips and Whitfield discussing how to handle demographic challenges in the cockpit. They specifically mentioned passenger comfort levels with diverse flight crew on Asian routes. Dominique Harris, a prominent civil rights attorney who had joined the team 3 days earlier, examined the flash drive. "This helps establish intent. They're not making security decisions, they're making racial ones." Jamal, who had been quietly absorbing the information, finally spoke. "What concerns me is that this isn't just about me, or even just about Skybound. This appears to be an industry-wide problem that no one wants to acknowledge." The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. They weren't just challenging one airline's discriminatory practices. They were potentially taking on systemic racism embedded in commercial aviation. "That's why we need to approach this strategically," Dominique advised. "A single discrimination case, even with strong evidence, can be settled and buried. But documenting a pattern across the industry could force regulatory intervention and meaningful change." "I've been contacted by the Black Pilots Association," Jamal said. "Their president, Dr. James Robinson, wants to meet. He says they've been collecting data on similar incidents for years but haven't had a case strong enough to go public with." Andre nodded approvingly. "That's a powerful alliance. The BPA represents over 800 pilots and has relationships with Congressional Transportation Committee members." As they strategized, Jamal's phone rang, an unknown number. "Captain Washington, this is Victor Perez. I understand you're building a case against Skybound Airlines." Jamal put the call on speaker. "Who am I speaking with exactly? I retired as FAA administrator last year. Before that, I spent 15 years in regulatory oversight for commercial carriers. I've been following your case through industry channels." The room went still, all eyes on the phone. "I appreciate your interest, Mr. Perez. But why are you calling me?" "Because what happened to you has been happening for decades, and it's time someone stood up to it. I tried addressing these issues from inside the system, but the industry resistance was substantial." "What kind of resistance?" Andre asked. "Airlines threatened to challenge FAA funding if we pursued certain diversity compliance investigations. Congressmen whose districts include airline headquarters intervened in regulatory matters. The systemic problems were acknowledged privately, but never addressed publicly. "Would you be willing to testify about this?" Dominique asked. "That's why I'm calling. I have documentation spanning 12 years, internal memos, compliance reports, statistical analyses showing clear discriminatory patterns in cockpit assignments, especially on international routes. I'm willing to provide all of it if you're serious about challenging the entire system." By the end of the day, their alliance had grown to include Perez, the BPA, and 3 former Skybound employees who had experienced similar discrimination but had signed NDAs as part of their separations. Dominique's law firm had assigned 2 additional attorneys and a research team to the case. That evening, as Jamal reviewed the growing evidence with Tanya and Amara at their dining table, his daughter made an unexpected contribution. "Dad, I've been analyzing something in my engineering lab," Amara said, opening her laptop. "Remember how you taught me to read aircraft maintenance records? I've been comparing the aircraft assignments for minority pilots versus white pilots at Skybound over the past 5 years. The spreadsheet she displayed showed a clear pattern. Black pilots were assigned to the oldest aircraft in the fleet nearly 3 times as often as their white counterparts. The average age of aircraft assigned to black captains is 12.3 years, Amara explained. For white captains, it's 7.1 years. The newer aircraft have more advanced systems, better fuel efficiency, and fewer maintenance issues, which means black pilots are being set up with more challenging operating conditions, Jamal observed, the revelation adding another layer to the discrimination pattern. Exactly. And when there are mechanical delays or passenger complaints about older interiors, guess whose performance metrics are affected? Tanya studied the data. Amara, this is incredibly valuable. Can you prepare a formal analysis for Andre's team? As they continued building their case, an anonymous email arrived in Jamal's inbox with the subject line, "Not alone." The sender, identifying only as Cockpit Truth, had attached a file containing documentation of 27 discrimination incidents across 8 major airlines over the past decade. Each case involved pilots of color being removed, reassigned, or subjected to additional scrutiny without justification. Most had been resolved with confidential settlements and career-restricting NDAs. They silenced 27 pilots, Jamal said, as he shared the file with Andre. How many more took the money and disappeared? This is how systemic discrimination perpetuates, Andre replied. Individual cases are isolated and resolved privately. No one sees the pattern because each victim is made to feel alone. The Alliance's investigation took an unexpected turn when they began looking into Lawrence Phillips' background. The head of security who had blocked Jamal from the cockpit had a troubling history that Skybound had either missed or ignored during hiring. Before joining Skybound, Phillips had worked for a private security firm that had been sued 3 times for racial profiling. Before that, he had been forced to resign from a regional airline after implementing what he called passenger comfort protocols that resulted in minority crew members being reassigned from first-class cabins. Most disturbing was the discovery of Phillips's connection to Thomas Whitfield. Before either had joined Skybound, they had served together on an industry passenger experience committee that had privately advocated for demographic alignment in premium service positions. They've been working together on this agenda for years, Dominique observed during a strategy session. And now they're both in positions of power at one of the world's largest airlines. As the evidence mounted, Jamal found himself at the center of a movement that extended far beyond his original goal of personal justice. Pilots from across the country were contacting him with their own stories of discrimination. Flight attendants, ground crew, and even passengers were sending messages of support and additional documentation. Dr. Robinson from the BPA arranged a confidential meeting with Jamal and the Alliance team. Held in a secure conference room at the association's headquarters, the meeting revealed the true scope of the problem they were tackling. We've been tracking these cases for 15 years, Dr. Robinson explained, displaying a map with red dots representing reported discrimination incidents across the country. Over 200 cases, but only 8 have resulted in public legal action. The rest disappeared behind NDAs and private settlements. Why hasn't the BPA gone public with this data? Dominique asked. Without a strong case that could withstand, the industry's legal teams going public would have been dismissed as anecdotal complaints. The airlines would claim these were performance issues, not discrimination. We needed irrefutable evidence and a pilot willing to risk everything to see it through. All eyes turned to Jamal, who felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "Captain Washington," Dr. Robinson continued, "your case has everything we need. Clear documentation, multiple witnesses, explicit discriminatory intent, and a plaintiff with an impeccable record. If you're willing to be the face of this fight, the BPA will provide full support, including legal resources and access to our complete database of incidents." The alliance now included aviation attorneys, civil rights lawyers, current and former, airline employees, regulatory experts, and the organized representation of hundreds of black pilots. What had begun as one man's stand against injustice had transformed into a coordinated movement for industry-wide change. In Jamal's home office, now serving as the Operations Command Center, the Alliance held its most comprehensive strategy session yet. Maps, timelines, and evidence boards covered the walls. Laptops displayed data analyses and legal precedents. The air buzzed with purpose and determination. "We need to be prepared for aggressive countermeasures," Andre warned. "Once they realize the scope of what we're building, they'll use every resource to shut us down." "What should we expect?" Jamal asked. "Character assassination, evidence tampering, witness intimidation," Dominique listed. "They'll try to isolate you, destroy your credibility, and pressure everyone connected to you." "They already are," Tanya interjected, describing the increasingly hostile environment at her hospital. "Anonymous complaints about my work have suddenly appeared. Colleagues are being warned not to get involved in the Washington situation." Amara nodded grimly. "Same at the university. My academic advisor suggested I distance myself from controversy if I want industry recommendations after graduation." The threats were real and expanding, but so was the Alliance's resolve. That night, as the strategy session concluded, Jamal addressed the team with quiet determination. "When I was blocked from that cockpit, I thought I was fighting for my career and my dignity. Now I understand that we're fighting for every pilot who has been silenced, every qualified professional denied opportunity because of skin color, and every future aviator who deserves to be judged solely on their abilities." He gestured to the evidence board surrounding them. "What we've uncovered isn't just discrimination, it's a systematic effort to maintain aviation as an exclusive domain, where diversity is tolerated in carefully managed doses, but never fully accepted." Looking at each ally in turn, Jamal concluded, "This won't be easy or quick. The opposition has resources, influence, and a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. But they have one critical weakness. They need secrecy to continue their practices. We have the truth. And starting tomorrow, we're going to make sure everyone hears it." As the Alliance dispersed into the night, none of them could have anticipated the ruthlessness of the counterattack that was already being planned in Skybound's executive offices. The battle for the skies was about to enter its most turbulent phase, testing the limits of their courage, resources, and determination. The first sign of Skybound's counteroffensive came in the form of a breaking news alert on Jamal's phone. Questions arise about Captain's performance history. The article, published in the aviation industry journal Wingspan, cited anonymous sources within Skybound Airlines, claiming that Jamal Washington had been under review for multiple flight safety concerns prior to the cockpit denial incident. Jamal stared at his phone in disbelief. In 32 years of flying, he had never received a single safety violation. His record was immaculate, something he had taken professional pride in throughout his career. "They're fabricating a history," Andre said when Jamal forwarded him the article. "Classic character assassination. They're trying to shift the narrative from discrimination to competence." By afternoon, 3 more aviation publications had picked up the story, each adding new unsubstantiated claims. Issues with Jamal's decision-making. During turbulence, concerns about his communication with air traffic control, questions about his handling of a mechanical warning light on a previous flight. "None of this is in my personnel file," Jamal insisted during an emergency meeting with his legal team. I've never even been questioned about any of these supposed incidents. They're creating a paper trail retroactively, Dominique explained. We need to get ahead of this immediately. But before they could formulate a response, Trevor Coleman, the first officer who had been promoted to captain when Jamal was removed from Flight SB 1423, appeared on National Aviation News in a sit-down interview. I've always respected Captain Washington, Coleman began, his expression carefully crafted to convey reluctance. But in the weeks before the Tokyo flight, many of us noticed concerning changes in his behavior. He seemed distracted, sometimes agitated. During pre-flight for Tokyo, he missed several standard checklist items that I had to quietly correct. The interviewer, clearly briefed to avoid challenging these assertions, nodded sympathetically. Would you say there were legitimate safety concerns? Coleman sighed dramatically. Look, I didn't want to get involved in this situation, but when passenger safety is potentially compromised, we all have a responsibility to speak up. The protocols that were followed that day, while unfortunate in how they played out, may have prevented a more serious situation. That's a blatant lie, Jamal said, shutting off the television in disgust. Coleman and I reviewed that checklist together, item by item. There were no mistakes, no corrections. Tanya put a hand on his shoulder. We knew they'd fight dirty. This is just the beginning. She was right. The next morning, Jamal opened his front door to find his house vandalized with racist graffiti, crude slurs and threats spray-painted across the garage door and driveway. Despite calling immediately, police took over 3 hours to respond, by which time neighbors had photographed the scene, and images were circulating on social media with captions questioning whether Jamal had staged the incident himself. The POW. Timing is suspicious, one popular aviation forum poster wrote. Washington needs public sympathy, just as questions about his competence emerge. At the hospital, Tanya faced increasing hostility. Surgical assignments she had been scheduled for were reassigned without explanation. Colleagues who had been friends for years suddenly found reasons to avoid her in hallways and cafeterias. Amara's situation at the university deteriorated rapidly. Her academic advisor informed her that her scholarship review had raised concerns about her focus and suggested she might need to reapply with stronger commitments to academic priorities. The message was clear. The Washington family was being systematically isolated and pressured from all directions. When Jamal attempted to contact the FAA to verify his clean record, he discovered that an anonymous complaint had triggered a review of his piloting certifications. His licenses weren't revoked, but they were placed under administrative review, effectively preventing him from flying commercially until the review concluded. This has Whitfield written all over it, Andre observed. He has connections throughout the regulatory bodies. They can't legally revoke your licenses without cause, but they can freeze them indefinitely with these administrative maneuvers. The counterattack extended to the alliance itself. Dominique Harris arrived at her office one morning to find the door lock broken and files scattered across the floor. The only items missing were those related to Jamal's case, including witness statements and internal skybound documents provided by whistleblowers. They're trying to identify our sources, Dominique explained during an emergency conference call. We need to warn everyone who's been providing information. The warning came too late for Regina Taylor. That afternoon, she was called into a meeting with Lawrence Phillips in Human Resources, where she was confronted with surveillance footage showing her accessing flight records related to Jamal's case. Unauthorized access of confidential company information is grounds for immediate termination, Phillips informed her coldly. You'll be escorted from the building, and legal action for breach of confidentiality is being considered. As Regina was marched through Skybound's headquarters, employees watched in silence. Another clear message to anyone considering supporting Jamal's cause. The most devastating blow came when Zoe Chen discovered a coordinated social media disinformation campaign targeting Jamal and his supporters. Dozens of newly created accounts were posting identical messages questioning Jamal's mental stability, piloting skills, and motivations. Analysis of the accounts traced them back to a digital marketing firm previously hired by Skybound for brand management. They're spending hundreds of thousands on this, Zoe noted. This isn't just damage control, it's a scorched earth campaign to destroy your credibility and intimidate your supporters. The pressure intensified when the FAA announced they were investigating serious safety concerns regarding Jamal's previous flights. An agency that had once presented him with safety commendations was now publicly questioning his competence based on anonymous reports. "They've compromised the regulatory process," Victor Perez said grimly during a secure call. "I've contacted colleagues still at the FAA. This investigation was initiated after direct calls from 2 congressmen whose districts include skybound facilities." For the first time since the ordeal began, Jamal felt the weight of hopelessness pressing down on him. How could he fight a system with such extensive reach and resources? Every institution he had trusted throughout his career, the airline, the FAA, the aviation media, had been turned against him through connections, influence, and corporate power. The crisis came to a head during a tense family dinner. Tanya, usually the optimist, broke down in tears describing the hostility she faced at work. Amara revealed she had received an explicit threat that she would never work in aviation if her father continued his case. "Maybe we should consider their settlement offer," Tanya suggested quietly. "We could move away, start fresh somewhere else. This is destroying our lives." Jamal stared at his untouched food, the weight of responsibility crushing him. Was it fair to put his family through this? Skybound's latest offer had reached $8 million. Enough to relocate, rebuild their lives, and ensure Amara's future. "If I take their money and sign their NDA, nothing changes," he said finally. "The next black pilot faces the same discrimination. The next family goes through this same hell." "But does it have to be us fighting this battle?" Tanya asked, her voice strained. "Haven't we given enough?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable and heavy with implications. For the first time, Jamal seriously considered surrendering, not for himself, but for his family's sake. Has discrimination in the workplace affected you or someone you know? Comment standing firm if you believe in fighting injustice despite the personal cost. Like this video if you think corporations should be held accountable for discriminatory practices. Subscribe if you want to see how Captain Washington navigates this critical moment when everything he's fighting for hangs in the balance. But ask yourself, what would you sacrifice for justice? Would you risk your career, reputation, and family's well-being to challenge a broken system? Or would you take the settlement and walk away? That night, alone in his study, Jamal drafted an email to Andre, outlining terms under which he might accept a settlement. His finger hovered over the send button for several minutes before he closed the laptop without sending it. Sleep eluded him as he wrestled with the most difficult decision of his life. Morning brought no clarity. Jamal moved through his routine mechanically, the weight of impending surrender heavy on his shoulders. He was pouring coffee when his phone rang. Zoe Chen calling. "Jamal, turn on National News Network right now," she said urgently. The television, screen filled with shocking footage. A clear, high-resolution video of the cockpit denial incident, shot by a passenger seated in first class. Unlike the grainy images that had circulated previously, this video captured the entire confrontation in detail, including Lawrence Phillips clearly stating, "We can't have someone like you commanding this aircraft to Tokyo. The passengers expect a certain image." The racial implication was unmistakable, directly contradicting Skybound's claim that the removal was based on security protocols. "Where did this come from?" Jamal asked, watching as the footage played on repeat across social media and news channels. "A passenger finally decided to come forward. She said she's been watching your story unfold and couldn't stay silent any longer." The video changed everything. Within hours, Skybound stock dropped 12% as investors reacted to the easy, explicit evidence of discrimination. Aviation forums that had been critical of Jamal suddenly filled with messages of support. The narrative was shifting rapidly. More support arrived from an unexpected source. Jackson Miller, Skybound's recently retired security director, contacted Andre with an offer to testify. "I retired 2 months ago after 30 years with the company," Miller explained during their meeting. "What happened to Captain Washington was the final straw for me. I have documents showing this wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic effort directed from the executive level. Miller provided internal memos detailing what Skybound called enhanced crew oversight, a protocol specifically targeting minority pilots for additional scrutiny on international routes. The documents explicitly referenced passenger demographic, preferences, and cultural alignment considerations in crew assignments. They created an entire security framework to justify racial discrimination, Miller explained. Phillips was brought in specifically to implement these protocols because of his experience with similar programs at other airlines. With Miller's evidence and the viral video, momentum shifted dramatically. Zoe Chen published a breakthrough, investigative piece revealing connections between Skybound executives and several radical groups promoting racial homogeneity in public-facing positions. Regina Taylor, despite being terminated, provided one final piece of critical evidence: access codes to Skybound security footage archives. These revealed a damning meeting between CEO Montgomery, Thomas Whitfield, and Lawrence Phillips, 3 days before the Tokyo flight. "We need to make an example with Washington," Whitfield could be heard saying clearly. "He's too visible in his new role. The Tokyo routes are particularly sensitive to crew composition." Montgomery nodded in agreement. "Use the security protocol. Make it seem procedural rather than personal. Coleman is prepared to step in as captain." The most explosive revelation came when Lawrence Phillips was caught on a hot microphone telling a colleague, "Washington was specifically targeted. We've been waiting for an opportunity to move him off international routes since his promotion. Tokyo was perfect timing." As these pieces of evidence became public, national media outlets finally gave the story the attention it deserved. What had initially been portrayed as a dispute between a pilot and his airline was now revealed as a systematic effort to discriminate against minority aviators across the industry. The tide had turned. The alliance that had fought so hard against overwhelming odds now found itself at the center of a national conversation about discrimination in aviation. The same corporations and regulators that had tried to silence Jamal now faced public scrutiny and demands for accountability. For the Washington family, the validation came with mixed emotions. The truth was finally emerging. But the damage to their lives had been substantial. Tanya's professional reputation had been tarnished. Amara's academic future remained uncertain. Jamal still couldn't fly commercially while his licenses remained under administrative review. But something fundamental had changed. The isolation was over. Colleagues who had distanced themselves now reached out with support. Other pilots came forward with similar experiences, adding their voices to what had become a movement for industry-wide reform. As Jamal prepared for the legal battle ahead, he no longer questioned whether the fight was worth the cost. The evidence, now displayed across his office walls, revealed a systemic injustice far greater than his personal experience, one that had silenced countless qualified aviators and undermined the meritocracy that aviation claimed to uphold. The counterattack had failed. In trying to destroy one man's credibility, Skybound had inadvertently exposed an entire system of discrimination. Now, with public opinion shifting and evidence mounting, Captain Jamal Washington prepared to take his case from the court of public opinion to the courts of law, where the real battle for justice would ultimately be decided. The conference room in Andre Coleman's law office fell silent as they all watched the video for the third time. What had begun as a grainy, partially obscured recording from a passenger's phone had been professionally enhanced, revealing details that changed everything. "Play it again," Dominique requested, leaning forward intently. "Focus on Phillips' exact wording." The enhanced video showed the confrontation with crystal clarity. Lawrence Phillips blocking the cockpit door, his posture aggressive despite his professional attire. First Officer Coleman standing awkwardly to the side, unable to meet Jamal's eyes. And most importantly, Phillips's unmistakable words. "Captain Washington, passengers flying to Tokyo expect a certain type of pilot. Our premium routes have image requirements that you simply don't fit. This is about passenger comfort, not your qualifications." When Jamal had protested, pointing out his decades of experience and perfect record, Phillips had leaned in, unaware that he was being recorded, and whispered, "Look, we both know what this is about. Your kind belongs on domestic routes where passengers have fewer expectations. This is business, not personal. The racial implications couldn't have been clearer if Phillips had used explicit slurs. This video contradicts every statement Skybound has made about the incident, Andre observed, pausing the footage. They claimed it was about security protocols. This proves it was explicit racial discrimination. The video had been uploaded anonymously to social media the previous night and had already garnered over 5 million views. Hashtags like Flying While Black and Skybound Discrimination were trending across all platforms. Major news networks had picked up the story, finally moving it from aviation specialty coverage to mainstream headlines. The passenger who recorded this took a huge risk, Zoe Chen noted. Skybound's terms of service prohibit recording security procedures. They could potentially pursue legal action against her. That's exactly why she remained anonymous, Dominique replied. But this changes our entire strategy. We now have irrefutable evidence of discriminatory intent. For Jamal, watching the video stirred complex emotions. The humiliation of that moment had been seared into his memory, but seeing it played back, hearing the explicit bias he had suspected but couldn't prove, brought both validation and renewed anger. They can't claim this was a misunderstanding or security protocol, he said quietly. Phillips made it absolutely clear this was about race. The video had already generated substantial public reaction. Skybound's social media accounts were flooded with outraged comments. Aviation forums that had previously questioned Jamal's claims were now filled with pilots sharing similar experiences. The hashtag #IfFly with Jamal had been used by over 50,000 people, including several celebrities and public figures. Skybound's initial response had been a terse statement. We are aware of a video circulating online that appears to show a Skybound security procedure. We are investigating the context and authenticity of this recording. They're buying time, Andre observed. Their legal team is probably in crisis mode right now. The video revelation coincided with another critical development. Jackson Miller, Skybound's recently retired security director, had provided the alliance with a comprehensive file of internal documents after watching the viral video. I can't stay silent anymore, Miller had explained during their meeting. I retired 2 months ago after 30 years with the company, and what I witnessed in my final years there troubled me deeply. Miller, a former Air Force security specialist, had maintained detailed records of policy changes implemented under the current leadership. The most damning was a directive issued 18 months earlier titled International Route Crew Composition Guidelines. This document explicitly instructed scheduling to minimize the assignment of minority pilots to premium international routes, Miller explained, pointing to highlighted sections. They used euphemisms like passenger comfort considerations and cultural alignment, but the intent was clear. Keep black and brown pilots off the flagship routes to certain destinations. The directive included a scoring system for crew assignments that gave negative points for demographic diversity on routes to Japan, Switzerland, and several other predominantly white countries. Positive points were awarded for what was termed passenger expectation alignment, essentially meaning white pilots. Phillips was brought in specifically to implement these policies, Miller continued. His background in passenger experience management was code for his willingness to enforce racial preferences in crew composition. Most shocking was an email chain between CEO Richard Montgomery and Thomas Whitfield discussing how to manage the perception of their international flight deck staffing. Montgomery had written, "We need to maintain traditional flight deck composition on premium routes while still meeting diversity metrics overall. Assign minority pilots to domestic and Caribbean routes, where their presence may actually be advantageous." Whitfield's response had been even more explicit. "Agreed. Our Tokyo and Zurich passengers expect a certain pilot profile. We can meet our diversity numbers without compromising premium route expectations." This is the smoking gun, Dominique said, reviewing the documents. They created an entire system to segregate pilots by race while maintaining plausible deniability. The alliance's breakthrough continued when Zoe Chen discovered a connection that had eluded them previously. Through investigative reporting, she uncovered that Skybound executives had participated in closed industry forums discussing passenger demographic preferences regarding flight crew composition. These weren't official industry events. Zoe explained, displaying screenshots of meeting agendas. They were invitation-only gatherings at private clubs with no public records, but I found expense reports and calendar entries confirming that Montgomery, Whitfield, and executives from 7 other major airlines attended regularly. The forums had innocuous titles like Premium Service Excellence Symposium and International Route Optimization Workshop, but agenda items included discussions of passenger comfort with flight deck diversity and cultural alignment strategies for premium routes. With Regina Taylor's security access codes, the Alliance gained access to Skybound's internal security footage archives. Though she had been terminated, her credentials remained active long enough to retrieve crucial evidence. The footage included a damning recording of a meeting between CEO Montgomery, Thomas Whitfield, and Lawrence Phillips discussing their image maintenance strategy. "We need to ensure our international routes reflect the proper image," Montgomery stated clearly in the recording. "Our market research shows that certain demographics respond negatively to diverse cockpit crews, particularly on premium Asian and European routes." Whitfield nodded in agreement. "The Tokyo route is particularly sensitive. Our highest-paying customers have certain expectations about who's flying their plane." The most explicit statement came from Phillips. "I have a plan for Washington. He's too visible in his chief training officer role. We'll use the security protocol on his next Tokyo flight. Coleman is prepared to step in. We'll make it procedural, rather than personal." This evidence transformed the case from one pilot's claim of discrimination to proof of a systematic corporate policy. When a transcript of the meeting was leaked to major news outlets, the public reaction was immediate and intense. Skybound's stock plummeted 17% in a single day. Corporate partners and celebrity endorsers began publicly distancing themselves from the airline. The final piece of devastating evidence emerged when Lawrence Phillips was recorded on a hot microphone during what he thought was a private conversation with a subordinate. Washington was specifically targeted because he was becoming too prominent. "We've been waiting for an opportunity to move him off international routes since his promotion." The Tokyo flight was perfect timing. These protocols were designed exactly for cases like his, keeping the wrong people out of the wrong positions, without creating discrimination liability. As these revelations cascaded through media channels, the narrative shifted dramatically. Aviation analysts who had initially been skeptical of Jamal's claims now devoted entire segments to examining industry-wide discrimination. Pilots from other airlines began coming forward with similar experiences, suggesting a pervasive problem that extended far beyond Skybound. Dr. James Robinson of the Black Pilots Association coordinated a press conference featuring 15 black commercial pilots who had experienced similar treatment but had previously been silenced by NDAs. Their collective testimony painted a damning picture of an industry where racial discrimination had been systematically concealed behind security protocols and performance reviews. "For decades, we've been told these were isolated incidents or misunderstandings," Dr. Robinson stated. "Captain Washington's courage in challenging this system has finally exposed the truth. Commercial aviation maintains a racial hierarchy that relegates qualified minority pilots to less visible, less prestigious routes regardless of their qualifications." The industry-wide examination gained further momentum when Victor Perez released his collection of internal FAA documents, showing that discrimination complaints from minority pilots had been consistently deprioritized or dismissed due to pressure from airline executives and lobbyists. The regulatory system that should protect against discrimination has instead been complicit in maintaining it, Perez testified during a hastily convened Department of Transportation hearing. For Jamal and his family, the vindication brought mixed emotions. The truth was finally emerging, but the personal cost had been enormous. Tanya's career had been damaged by the campaign against her. Amara had withdrawn from her university program after repeated threats and hostility. "Was it worth it?" Tanya asked quietly one evening as they watched yet another news report about the widening scandal. Jamal considered the question carefully. "If it ends with just our case, then no. The cost was too high for one family to bear. But if this changes the system for everyone who comes after us, for every qualified pilot who deserves to be judged solely on their abilities, then yes, it was worth everything we've endured." The turning point in public perception came when hundreds of skybound passengers began sharing their own stories on social media. Many expressed shock at the airline's discriminatory practices and recalled positive experiences with diverse flight crews. The hashtag #MyPilotMyChoice trended as passengers rejected the airline's assumption about their comfort preferences. One viral post came from a frequent skybound international traveler. "I've flown over 2 million miles, and my only comfort preference is a pilot who's highly qualified and professional. I don't care about their race, gender, or any other characteristic. Skybound doesn't speak for me with their racist policies." Even some Skybound employees began wearing small blue pins, the color of Jamal's tie on the day of the incident, as a subtle sign of solidarity. Flight attendants reported passengers asking if Captain Washington would be returning to the airline. As public pressure mounted, Skybound's board of directors called an emergency meeting. Sources within the company reported heated exchanges between board members who wanted to settle the case quickly and those who feared admitting liability would open the door to additional lawsuits. The decisive moment came when a junior board member leaked information that CEO Montgomery had actually received warnings from the legal department about the discriminatory nature of the crew composition guidelines, but had proceeded anyway, putting the company at significant legal risk. With this revelation, the board's focus shifted from defending the company's actions to limiting damage and liability. By evening, Skybound issued a terse statement announcing that CEO Richard Montgomery, board member Thomas Whitfield, and head of security Lawrence Phillips had been placed on administrative leave pending a comprehensive internal investigation. For Captain Jamal Washington, the turning point wasn't about corporate shakeups or public relations damage control. It was about finally having his truth acknowledged after months of being portrayed as disgruntled or unstable. The evidence now confirmed what he had known on that humiliating day in the jet bridge. He had been removed from command not because of security concerns, but because of the color of his skin. With vindication came responsibility. As other pilots reached out with their own stories, Jamal recognized that his case could establish important legal precedents for the industry. What had begun as one man's fight for justice had evolved into a movement for systematic change that could transform commercial aviation for generations to come. As Jamal prepared for the legal battle ahead, he knew that the most difficult challenges might still lie ahead. Corporate America had deep pockets and endless legal resources. But for the first time since this ordeal began, the headwinds had shifted. With truth now flying in formation alongside justice, Captain Jamal Washington was finally regaining the altitude that discrimination had tried to deny him. The William Augustus Courthouse stood imposing against the Manhattan skyline, its neoclassical columns reflecting the morning sunlight as news crews gathered on the broad stone steps. Inside courtroom 4B, the atmosphere was tense as lawyers arranged documents and whispered last-minute strategies to their clients. At the plaintiff's table, Captain Jamal Washington sat straight-backed in a charcoal suit, his airline wings pinned to his lapel, a silent reminder of his professional identity. Even outside the cockpit, beside him, Andre Coleman and Dominique Harris reviewed their opening arguments, occasionally consulting with their team of paralegals and researchers positioned in the row behind them. Across the aisle, Skybound Airlines' legal representation was formidable, a phalanx of attorneys from Preston, Harrington, and Yale, one of the nation's most powerful corporate law firms. Leading their defense was Catherine Williams, known in legal circles as the Cleaner, for her ability to minimize corporate liability in high-profile discrimination cases. "All rise." Judge Eleanor Martinez entered the courtroom, her expression revealing nothing as she surveyed the packed gallery. At 63, she had earned a reputation for strict courtroom management and zero tolerance for legal theatrics. "Washington v. Skybound Airlines," the clerk announced. "Case number 2025 CV 4872. "You may be seated," Judge Martinez said, adjusting her glasses. "This court is now in session. We'll begin with opening statements." Dominique Harris approached the podium with measured confidence. At 42, she had already argued 7 cases before the Supreme Court and specialized in employment discrimination litigation. "Your Honor, this case is about more than a single incident of discrimination. It reveals a systematic corporate, policy designed to remove qualified black pilots from prestigious international routes based solely on their race. For the next 20 minutes, Dominique outlined the evidence they would present, the explicit crew composition guidelines, the recorded meetings discussing passenger demographic preferences, and the targeted removal of Captain Washington from Flight SB 1423. The evidence will show that Skybound's actions were not isolated or accidental. They were the intentional implementation of a discriminatory system that prioritized racial homogeneity over pilot qualifications, passenger safety, and federal law. Catherine Williams' opening statement offered a starkly different narrative. Your Honor, Skybound Airlines has served millions of passengers safely for over 50 years. Like all airlines, it implements security protocols designed to ensure passenger safety and operational excellence. Captain Washington's removal from Flight SB 1423 was the result of standard security procedures applied equally to all pilots when concerns arise. Williams portrayed the incident as a routine security matter that had been mischaracterized and exploited for financial gain. She promised to demonstrate that Skybound maintained robust diversity initiatives and that any references to crew composition were about cultural competency for international routes, not racial preferences. As the trial progressed through its first week, the stark contrast between evidence and corporate narrative became increasingly apparent. Skybound's witnesses repeatedly claimed that Jamal's removal had been based on confidential security protocols that they couldn't detail in open court. The turning point came during Lawrence Phillips's testimony. Andre Coleman approached the cross-examination methodically, establishing Phillips's history with discriminatory practices at previous employers before addressing the Skybound incident. Mr. Phillips, in the security footage from April 15th, you, stated to your colleague that Captain Washington was specifically targeted. What did you mean by that? Phillips shifted uncomfortably. That was taken out of context. I meant he was randomly selected for additional screening. Random selection is targeting someone specifically? Andre pressed. That's not what I meant. Andre displayed the transcript on the courtroom screen. You also said, well, we've been waiting for an opportunity to move him off international routes since his promotion. How does that align with random selection? I misspoke in that conversation. You misspoke when you didn't. Know you were being recorded, but you're speaking accurately now under oath? Catherine Williams rose to object, but Phillips was already faltering. As Andre methodically walked him through each damning statement captured on various recordings, Phillips's composed demeanor crumbled. These protocols were designed to maintain the airline's image, he finally blurted, his frustration overcoming his preparation. Our premium international passengers expect a certain type of pilot. That's not discrimination. It's business. Every airline does it. The courtroom erupted, requiring Judge Martinez to bang her gavel repeatedly for order. Phillips's outburst became headline news across the country, confirming in his own words what the evidence had already suggested. Skybound had systematically discriminated against black pilots on international routes. Expert witnesses further strengthened Jamal's case. Dr. Amelia Richardson, an aviation psychologist, testified about the impact of racial bias on cockpit dynamics and flight safety. When airlines implement discriminatory practices, they undermine the fundamental meritocracy that aviation safety depends upon, Dr. Richardson explained. Assigning routes based on race rather than qualification introduces dangerous variables into an industry where skill and experience should be the only criteria. Statistical evidence presented by Dr. Terrence Wong, a data analyst specializing in employment patterns, revealed that despite making up nearly 12% of Skybound's total pilot workforce, black pilots represented less than 2% of captains assigned to premium international routes. The statistical probability of this distribution occurring naturally, without discriminatory selection, is approximately 1 in 7.4 million, Dr. Wong testified. These numbers can only be explained by systematic exclusion. Skybound's defense strategy began to unravel further when CEO Richard Montgomery took the stand. Under Andre's careful questioning, Montgomery's carefully maintained corporate persona began to crack. Mr. Montgomery, in an email dated January 12th, you wrote to Thomas Whitfield, We need to maintain traditional flight deck composition on premium routes. What exactly did you mean by traditional composition? Montgomery cleared his throat. I was referring to experience levels, seniority, that sort of thing. Andre displayed the full email chain on the courtroom screen. Then why does Mr. Whitfield's response specifically mention that Tokyo and Zurich passengers expect a certain pilot profile, and that you can meet diversity numbers without compromising premium route expectations? That was Whitfield's interpretation, not mine. Yet you didn't correct this interpretation in your reply. In fact, you wrote exactly, implement accordingly. Did you not understand what Mr. Whitfield was suggesting? As Montgomery struggled to explain away the explicit language in his own emails, board members in the gallery exchanged worried glances. The CEO's testimony was creating additional liability with every evasive answer. The most dramatic courtroom moment came when first, Officer Trevor Coleman was called to testify. Expected to support Skybound's version of events, Coleman surprised everyone by arriving with his own attorney. Mr. Coleman, did you observe any security concerns regarding Captain Washington prior to Flight SB 1423? Dominique asked. Coleman glanced at his attorney, who nodded slightly. No. Captain Washington was completely professional and followed all protocols perfectly. Then why did you state in a television interview that he had missed several standard checklist items that you had to quietly correct? Coleman's voice dropped. I was instructed to say that by Mr. Phillips and Mr. Whitfield. They told me my career advancement depended on supporting the company's position. Catherine Williams immediately objected, but Coleman continued. They coached me on specific points to make during the interview. None of it was true. Captain Washington is one of the most meticulous pilots I've ever flown with. Coleman's testimony created a ripple effect. Other Skybound employees began coming forward, no longer willing to maintain the company's false narrative. A flight attendant testified about overhearing Phillips explicitly discussing the need to limit diversity in visible positions. A scheduling manager admitted to receiving directives about appropriate demographic distribution for certain routes. As the trial entered its third week, the testimonies increasingly contradicted Skybound's claim that Jamal's removal had been an isolated security matter. Instead, a clear picture emerged of a systematic effort to remove black pilots from prestigious international routes, while maintaining just enough diversity overall to avoid regulatory scrutiny. In a surprising development, midway through the trial, pilots from 12 other airlines came forward with similar experiences, filing motions to join the case as additional plaintiffs. Judge Martinez denied these motions, but allowed their testimonies as supporting evidence of industry-wide patterns. Your Honor, Andre argued, these testimonies establish that what happened to Captain Washington wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pervasive industry practice that has denied opportunities to qualified pilots based solely on race. The broader implications of the case attracted national attention. Civil rights organizations filed amicus briefs supporting Jamal's position. Aviation industry groups split, with some defending airlines' right to make business decisions about crew assignments, while others condemned discrimination in any form. As the evidence mounted against Skybound, settlement offers increased dramatically. What had begun as $2 million before trial quickly escalated to $15 million, then $25 million with additional conditions, including reinstatement and policy changes. Jamal consistently refused these offers, insisting on public accountability rather than confidential resolution. His position was unwavering. This case needed to establish clear legal precedent for the industry, not disappear behind an NDA. Captain Washington, Judge Martinez asked during a settlement conference, you understand that proceeding to verdict carries significant risks? The jury may award less than what's being offered. I understand, Your Honor, Jamal replied. But this case has never been about money. It's about changing a system that has denied opportunities to qualified pilots for decades. No amount of private compensation can achieve that. As the trial neared its conclusion, Catherine Williams made a last-ditch effort to salvage Skybound's position, calling character witnesses to testify about the airline's commitment to diversity and inclusion. Skybound has invested millions in diversity recruitment programs, testified the airline's chief diversity officer, Martha Jenkins. We actively seek minority candidates for all positions. During cross-examination, Dominique displayed Skybound's own data showing that while recruitment of minority pilots had increased, their assignments to prestigious routes had not. So Skybound recruits black pilots, Dominique clarified, but then restricts them to less visible, less prestigious routes. Isn't that segregation rather than inclusion? Jenkins had no effective response. In their closing arguments, Skybound's attorneys attempted to portray the airline as an imperfect organization making good faith efforts toward inclusion, with the Washington incident representing an unfortunate miscommunication rather than intentional discrimination. Dominique's closing argument was powerful in its simplicity. Your Honor, the evidence presented in this courtroom tells a clear story. Skybound Airlines created and implemented policies specifically designed to remove black pilots from prestigious international routes. When Captain Washington's prominence as chief training officer made him too visible, they used fabricated security concerns to remove him from the Tokyo flight. She gestured to the evidence boards displaying the internal documents, emails, and transcripts. Their own words confirm their intent. Their own data reveals the systematic nature of their discrimination, and their own witnesses have acknowledged the truth under oath. Dominique turned to face the gallery. This case is about more than one pilot's career. It's about whether our legal system will allow corporations to create modern segregation under the guise of passenger preferences or business decisions. Captain Washington has stood firm against enormous pressure because he understands that this verdict will set precedents that affect everyone who follows him into the cockpit. As the jury began deliberations, the atmosphere in the courthouse remained tense. Skybound's attorneys made one final settlement offer: $40 million with no admission of wrongdoing, but a commitment to revise crew assignment policies. Jamal declined again. "We've come too far for a private resolution," he told Andre. "This needs to be decided publicly, with all the implications that come with it." On the eve of the verdict, after the jury had been sequestered but before their decision was announced, Skybound executives made a desperate final attempt to contain the situation. Board members approached Jamal directly, bypassing his legal team, with veiled threats about unfortunate consequences for his daughter's aviation career if the case proceeded to verdict. Rather than intimidating him, their approach only confirmed the righteousness of his stand. As Jamal prepared for the verdict that would determine not just his future but potentially transform an entire industry, he knew that regardless of the outcome, the truth had finally been exposed to the light of justice. The courtroom fell silent as the jury forewoman stood, holding the verdict form in slightly trembling hands. After 5 days of deliberation, the 7 women and 5 men had reached their decision in Washington vs. Skybound Airlines. "Have you reached a verdict?" Judge Martinez asked. "We have, Your Honor." "What say you?" The forewoman's voice rang clear in the hushed courtroom. "In the matter of discriminatory practices and wrongful removal, we find in favor of the plaintiff, Captain Jamal Washington." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, followed by muted exclamations and the furious scratching of reporters' pens. Jamal remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged, save for a slight glisten in his eyes. "On the matter of damages," the forewoman continued, "we award compensatory damages in the amount of $38 million. Another murmur swept the courtroom, but Judge Martinez silenced it with a raised hand. Furthermore, we find that Skybound Airlines' actions demonstrated willful disregard for federal anti-discrimination laws, warranting punitive damages in the amount of $75 million. The total, $113 million, represented the largest discrimination judgment ever awarded in the aviation industry. But the monetary award was only the beginning. Judge Martinez added her own judicial remedies. This court orders Skybound Airlines to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination protocols for all crew assignments, subject to independent monitoring for a period of not less than 5 years. The company must also establish a transparent review process for all international route assignments to ensure equity across all demographic groups. For Jamal, the most significant part of the judgment came next. Captain Washington shall be reinstated to his position with full seniority and benefits, including his role as Chief Training Officer. The court further orders the immediate removal of all negative documentation from his personnel file related to this matter. As the full implications of the verdict sank in, reactions varied dramatically across the courtroom. Skybound's attorneys huddled in urgent consultation. Several board members made hasty exits to address the imminent stock market reaction. Supporters and aviation industry observers exchanged looks of astonishment at the scope of the judgment. Outside the courthouse, the verdict made immediate headlines across the country. Historic victory in airline discrimination case. Black captain wins landmark judgment. Court orders aviation industry reform. The financial penalty, while substantial, proved less damaging to Skybound than the public reaction. Within hours, the airline's stock had fallen 22%. Corporate partners began publicly distancing themselves. Ticket sales plummeted as passengers expressed reluctance to fly with an airline condemned for systematic discrimination. But the most far-reaching consequences extended beyond Skybound. Within days of the verdict, the Department of Justice announced criminal charges against Lawrence Phillips and 2 Skybound executives for evidence tampering and witness intimidation during the investigation. The integrity of our legal system depends on truthful testimony and untampered evidence, the Attorney General stated in a press conference. When corporate officials deliberately obstruct justice to conceal discrimination, they undermine not just employment law but the foundation of our legal system. The Federal Aviation Administration, facing criticism for its failure to address discrimination complaints, implemented new industry-wide anti-discrimination protocols that would apply to all commercial airlines operating in the United States. These standards, formally named the Washington Standards, in recognition of the case that prompted them, established clear guidelines for equitable crew assignments and created confidential reporting mechanisms for discrimination concerns. This represents a fundamental shift in how we approach diversity in aviation, FAA Administrator Colleen Harper explained in the announcement. Qualifications and safety must always be the primary considerations in crew assignments, not race or other protected characteristics. The industry-wide audit that followed revealed similar discriminatory patterns at 12 major airlines, triggering additional investigations, settlements, and reforms. Airlines that had maintained these practices for decades suddenly faced regulatory scrutiny and public accountability. For Skybound Airlines, the verdict necessitated complete organizational transformation. The board of directors, facing shareholder lawsuits for failing to prevent discriminatory practices, voted to remove CEO Richard Montgomery and accept the resignations of several key executives implicated in the scandal. The new leadership team, led by interim CEO Jasmine Rodriguez, publicly apologized to Jamal and announced comprehensive reforms, including mandatory anti-bias training for all employees and the establishment of a diversity oversight committee with actual authority over route assignments and promotions. Skybound must acknowledge its failure and commit to genuine change, Rodriguez stated in her first press conference. We cannot undo the harm caused by past discrimination, but we can ensure it never happens again. In perhaps the most significant corporate reform, Regina Taylor, the flight attendant who had been fired for providing information to Jamal's legal team, was reinstated and appointed to head a new whistleblower protection program designed to shield employees who reported ethical concerns. This program will ensure that no employee faces retaliation for standing up for what's right, Regina explained during the program's launch. The culture of silence that protected discrimination must be permanently broken. For the Washington family, the victory brought both vindication and healing. Tanya's hospital colleagues, many of whom had distanced themselves during the controversy, now approached with apologies and renewed respect. The hospital administration, which had tacitly supported the campaign against her, suddenly discovered a need to strengthen their own diversity initiatives. Amara returned to her engineering program with a full scholarship from the National Aviation Foundation, established specifically to support minority students entering the aerospace field. Her experiences during the case had only strengthened her determination to transform the industry from within. My father opened the cockpit door wider for everyone who comes after him, she told a student aviation group. I plan to continue that work through engineering innovation and inclusive design. For Jamal himself, the journey back to the cockpit proved both emotional and triumphant. On a crisp Monday morning, he returned to Skybound headquarters for the first time since his removal. Walking through the operations center in his captain's uniform, complete with 4 gold stripes and chief training officer insignia, he was met with mixed reactions, awkward avoidance from some, genuine welcome from others, and cautious observation from most. The day's schedule included reinstatement paperwork, medical certification, and simulator sessions to revalidate his qualifications after the forced absence. Though the procedures were routine, the context was anything but. Each interaction carried the weight of history. He was no longer just Captain Washington, but a symbol of resistance and change. As he completed the simulator assessment with perfect performance, the Czech airman, a younger pilot named David Okafor, offered a personal comment after signing the official documentation. Captain Washington, I joined Skybound 3 years ago. As one of only 4 black pilots in my training class, I watched how you carried yourself, how you maintained excellence while navigating challenges I could only imagine. What you've done, it changes everything for all of us. Thank you. Similar moments occurred throughout the day, with crew members, particularly younger minority staff, finding quiet opportunities to express gratitude for his stand against discrimination. Even those who had remained silent during the controversy now acknowledged the importance of the changes his case had triggered. The true test came 2 weeks later when Jamal was scheduled to command his first flight since reinstatement, a Skybound 1423 to Tokyo, the very route from which he had been removed. The symbolism was intentional, a public statement that discrimination would no longer determine who commanded the airline's flagship international routes. As Jamal boarded the aircraft, the reception from the crew was noticeably different from his last experience on this route. Flight attendants greeted him with genuine respect. First Officer Rebecca Chen expressed her honor at flying with him. Most significantly, Head of Security James Torres personally verified his credentials with professional courtesy rather than suspicion. What Jamal hadn't anticipated was the passenger reaction. As he walked through the first-class cabin during boarding, spontaneous applause broke out, spreading through business class and into the main cabin as word passed that Captain Washington was commanding the flight. "Welcome back, Captain," an elderly passenger said, reaching out to shake his, and "we fly with you proudly." The flight itself was routine. Perfect weather across the Pacific, on-time arrival in Tokyo, standard procedures executed with the precision that had defined Jamal's career. But the context transformed this ordinary flight into a symbol of progress. The cockpit door now opened to qualified pilots regardless of race. In the year that followed, Jamal divided his time between flying international routes and implementing training reforms as part of his chief training officer duties. The Washington standards were incorporated into Skybound's training curriculum, with Jamal personally conducting sessions on recognizing and addressing bias in aviation operations. Perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Jamal was invited to testify before the Congressional Transportation Committee regarding industry-wide reforms to prevent discrimination in commercial aviation. The cockpit should represent the highest meritocracy, he testified, his voice carrying the authority of experience. When we allow factors other than qualification, skill, and character to determine who flies our aircraft, we compromise not just fairness, but safety itself. His testimony contributed to bipartisan legislation, strengthening anti-discrimination protections in transportation industries and establishing independent oversight mechanisms for crew assignment practices. 1 year to the day after the verdict, Jamal prepared to command another Tokyo flight. As he conducted the pre-flight briefing with his crew, he noticed something unusual: a young black pilot observing from the briefing room doorway. After the briefing concluded, the young man approached hesitantly. "Captain Washington, I'm Anthony Daniels, newly hired at Skybound. I just wanted to say, I'm in the international training program because of the doors you opened. 50 of us, the largest minority pilot class in Skybound's history, and we're all eligible for any routes we qualify for. No passenger preference limitations." Jamal smiled, extending his hand. "The only limitations that matter in aviation are the ones we place on ourselves, Anthony. Fly with excellence, and the sky belongs to you. All of it. Not just the routes. Someone else decides you should fly. As Jamal boarded his aircraft, he reflected on the transformation his stand had triggered. One incident of discrimination, challenged rather than accepted, had revealed a system of bias that had limited careers and opportunities for decades. One pilot's refusal to be silenced had created ripples of change throughout an entire industry. The cockpit of Flight SB-1423 still looked the same instruments, the same procedures, the same responsibilities. But who could access that cockpit had changed forever. As Captain Jamal Washington prepared for takeoff, he knew that his most important flight path had not been across oceans but through barriers. Barriers that would never again stand unchallenged in American aviation. What would you do if faced with discrimination in your workplace? Would you have the courage to stand up against a powerful system like Captain Washington did? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on fighting injustice. If this story moved you, please hit the like button to help others find it. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of triumph over adversity. Share this video with someone who needs inspiration to stand up for what's right. Thank you for joining Captain Washington's journey from injustice to transformation. Your support makes these stories possible. Have you ever witnessed or experienced workplace discrimination? Let us know in the comments below. Captain Jamal Washington's journey teaches us that individual courage can transform entire systems. When faced with blatant racism, he chose to fight rather than accept an unjust settlement, understanding that his battle was for everyone who would follow. His story shows that documentation is powerful. Recording conversations and gathering evidence turns suspicions into provable facts. We learn that allies are essential in facing discrimination, from his family to colleagues, who risked their careers. No victory against systemic racism happens alone. The legal battle reminds us that justice requires persistence through intimidation, character assassination, and personal attacks. Perhaps most importantly, Washington's triumph demonstrates that challenging discrimination isn't just about personal vindication, but about creating lasting change. His courage transformed industry standards, creating pathways for future generations of minority professionals. When confronting injustice, the hardest path often leads to the most meaningful change, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who comes after us. Has discrimination ever touched your life or the life of someone you care about? Share your experience in the comments. Your story might give courage to someone facing similar challenges. If Captain Washington's fight for justice inspired you, hit that like button to help this story reach others who need to hear it. Subscribe to join our community dedicated to sharing stories of courage against injustice. And please share this video with anyone who might be fighting their own battle against discrimination. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Thank you for witnessing Captain Washington's journey from injustice to transformation. Remember, when we stand against racism together, we create a world where merit truly matters more than appearance. Until next time, keep standing for what's right.